Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about one of history's most famous moments of pure laziness that somehow changed the entire trajectory of Western thought. You know the feeling. You wake up, the blanket's heavy, the light outside your window is that awkward half-gray of a morning that's not quite convincing you to move. Now, imagine you decide to just stay in bed all day, and somehow, by dinner time, you've accidentally invented modern philosophy. That's right, tonight we're gliding back to 1619, to a chilly morning in Germany, where a 20-something Frenchman named René Descartes decided he simply wasn't getting up. He stayed in bed with his thoughts, and what unfolded under those blankets would become one of the most famous intellectual awakenings ever recorded. You probably won't survive this story. At least, not if you're allergic to the combination of geometry, existential dread, and drafty 17th century inns. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help me out, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always cool seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying there, just like he did. A little cocooned, half dreaming. The year is 1619, and the air in Ulm, Germany, carries that sharp winter bite that sneaks through the shutters. Descartes, a French soldier by profession, but a philosopher only in secret, lies wrapped up in his blankets. The army he's joined, under Duke Maximilian of Bavaria, has no pressing orders for the day, so Descartes does what any rational being might. He lets the morning drift by. Outside, the Holy Roman Empire simmers with political tension. Inside, it's quiet except for the slow crack of wood in the hearth. You can almost smell the faint smoke mingling with candle wax and wool. He's got paper beside him. A habit. He keeps notes for his ideas, even when half asleep. Historians still argue whether he was truly bedridden that day, or if it's just a romantic embellishment. But we'll keep the cozy version. It's much more satisfying imagining that philosophy was born under a blanket rather than a battlefield tent. Descartes has been thinking about patterns, how numbers and space seem to obey invisible laws. He's trained in mathematics, the sort of field where things behave if you write them properly. But life, messy, uncertain, doesn't follow equations. And so, between dozing and scribbling, he wonders, what if certainty could be found somewhere deeper? Somewhere that doesn't depend on wobbly senses or tricky perceptions? You can almost hear the quill scratch. Maybe there's a crumb of bread near the inkpot, evidence of breakfast in bed centuries before it was Instagrammable. Descartes was known to eat little, but drink a bit of wine. It helped him think, or so he claimed. And here's your mainstream fact for the night. René Descartes was indeed serving in the Bavarian army around 1619 as a volunteer of sorts. He'd studied law in Poitiers, then drifted into mathematics and science, and like many restless young men of his class, found himself following armies across Europe. His real battles, though, were in his head. Now, a quirky tidbit. There's an obscure anecdote that during his military years, Descartes kept a small notebook he called his secret notebook, where he jotted down not tactics or maps, but strange dreams. One, supposedly, involved a giant windstorm that flung him across space. Another about a dictionary promising universal knowledge. Whether that's true or just early PR for the philosopher who dreams the future, no one can say. But you can picture him waking, breath fogging in the cold air, clutching his blanket, and thinking, what if everything I've learned could be doubted? Historians still argue whether that morning in bed truly birthed his method of radical doubt, or if it was a later embellishment Descartes inserted when rewriting his own legend. Il a sa by I once to thee. I stand. Oh, I. Either way, the image stuck. Philosophy's great origin story set not in a library or a university, but in the warmth of a bed, between sleep and waking. You let your own eyes drift shut for a moment, and you can almost imagine his heartbeat sensing with the creak of the wooden bed frame. There's something comforting about it. The idea that knowledge could begin not in chaos, but in quiet. He stretches, feeling the chill creep into his toes. Somewhere outside, a church bell tolls. The hour's unimportant. Time is a flat thing when you've decided not to get up. Instead, he pulls the blanket tighter and begins a small ritual of self-questioning. Can he trust his senses? The fire seems to glow. But what if his eyes deceive him? The sheets feel warm. But what if sensation itself is a trick? He's not being dramatic. He's testing. Everything must be doubted, he tells himself, until something indubitable remains. And you, lying there centuries later, can feel the soft absurdity of it. The man who would give us the famous, I think, therefore I am, begins by thinking, maybe I don't even have a body. Philosophers call this methodological skepticism. You might call it overthinking before coffee. 1. A mouse scurries near the hearth. Proof, perhaps, that the world does exist, or at least that crumbs do. Take smirks at his own thoughts. There's a playful streak to his writing, though most people miss it. Beneath all that logic lies a man who's amused by the weirdness of human existence. In this drowsy limbo, ideas begin to form. He imagines a mind so clear and distinct it can't be fooled. A foundation so stable that even if everything else were false, this one thing would stand. The act of thinking itself. He doesn't name it yet. For now, it's just a shimmer in the dark, a thought about thought. Your own breathing slows. The candle on the nightstand flickers. You can almost hear his inner voice murmuring through time. If I doubt everything, at least I cannot doubt that I am doubting. There it is, the tiniest seed of modern philosophy, germinating between yawns. But Descartes doesn't leap up and proclaim victory. He just smiles faintly, perhaps tucks the parchment under his pillow. The day stretches ahead, but he's already done more before getting out of bed than most of us manage with 3 espressos and a full planner. Outside, soldiers bark orders, and the world returns to its usual noise. Inside, one quiet man stays in bed, tracing invisible lines between mind and matter, between waking and dream. And somewhere in that stillness, you start to sense that you're not just listening to history, you're inside it, wrapped in the same philosophical blanket, waiting for the next question to unfold. You're still there, hovering in that slow dawn, quiet with him. The way your mind floats before caffeine, but after the first faint thought of, what time is it? The room hasn't changed much. Still the soft thrum of winter wind against the shutters. But Descartes' morning has ripened into a strange, meditative rhythm. You can almost feel him rolling onto his side, face pressed into the pillow, staring at nothing in particular, and letting his mind wander where his legs want. The morning begins not with action, but with observation. You notice how he treats his own thoughts like curious insects. He doesn't swat them, just lets them crawl around until they reveal their pattern. He's got his notebook, a candle stub, and that stubborn little kernel of curiosity that won't let him rest even when he's doing nothing. You might envy that kind of focus, or fear it. Outside, the world hums in a different register. Carts creaking, servants fetching water, a rooster who clearly didn't read the memo about philosophers sleeping in. And you can sense Descartes tuning it all out, drawing the world inward. If yesterday belonged to soldiers, today belongs entirely to his mind. He stretches again, maybe scratches his beard. Yes, he had one back then, before the fashionable shaves of his Paris years, and thinks about his life so far. A lawyer's son, born in La Haye en Touraine in 1596. Frail since childhood, but trained to be clever. He'd studied at the Jesuit College of La Flèche, a place so disciplined that the clocks were synchronized with the ringing of the church bells. Every movement measured, every idea filtered through theology. You picture little René, the quiet student, building tiny mechanical models in the dormitory while other boys pray. And that's your mainstream fact for this section. La Flèche was one of the most elite schools in France at the time, known for blending rigorous mathematics with Catholic doctrine. The Jesuits wanted precision in both spirit and reason, an education meant to create minds as disciplined as soldiers. But imagine the contradiction. You teach someone absolute order, then expect them never to question it. Descartes had absorbed the rules so well that he was perfectly positioned to dismantle them later. The habit of method, once turned inward, becomes doubt itself. Now, Descartes rolls onto his back and starts to perform the smallest of experiments. He holds up his hand to the dim light. Do I know this hand exists? He asks himself silently. It looks real enough. Slightly smudged with ink, faint blue veins under pale skin. But what if it's a dream hand? What if everything he's seeing is part of some elaborate illusion? This is where the day becomes slightly ridiculous. Because, yes, he's essentially arguing with his own fingers. But that's philosophy for you. Serious faces, absurd questions. He closes his eyes. Maybe he's back in that dream he had months before. The one with the dictionary that promised total knowledge. He wonders what it means to know anything at all. Historians still argue whether that dream truly happened, or whether he borrowed the story later to dramatize his intellectual awakening. But whatever its origin, it fits. Descartes' life seems punctuated by these eerie moments when the border between waking and dreaming dissolves. Now, for your quirky tidbit, there's an obscure letter in which a friend of Descartes claimed that he once tried to measure the soul by timing his own heartbeat during prayer. Imagine him lying there, hand to his chest, counting beats, half scientist, half mystic. That mixture of logic and wonder would haunt his entire career. You can feel his mind starting to organize itself, like a drawer of mismatched spoons finally sorted. Everything, math, theology, dream, doubt, has to fit somewhere. And so he begins outlining what he'll later call his method. It's not fully formed yet. It's still a cluster of intuitions swirling under the covers. But you can trace its shape. Never accept anything as true, unless it's absolutely certain. Break problems into smaller parts. Proceed from the simple to the complex. Check everything again. It sounds almost like an algorithm. Centuries before computers. Though Descartes, ever the mathematician, probably would thought of it more as mental geometry. He takes another breath, a slow one that fills the room with calm logic. The candle flickers. The air smells faintly of tallow and parchment. You might call it cozy if not for the sense that he's dismantling reality molecule by molecule. He glances toward the frost patterns on the window pane. They look like branching rivers, or maybe the veins of leaves. He wonders whether those patterns follow mathematical rules too. Could everything, nature, thought, even the soul, be expressed through numbers? That's when your first little joke of the section sneaks in. If Descartes had Instagram, he'd probably post those frost patterns with a caption like #natural symmetry #mind body selfie. But humor aside, he's onto something radical. For Descartes, the world isn't chaos. It's order hidden under layers of confusion. The problem isn't that reality is messy. It's that human perception is. If only the mind could clean its glasses, everything would come into focus. He rolls over, grabs the notebook, and begins sketching lines. Simple geometric forms that dance across the page. Circles, axes, diagonal cuts. You realize what he's doing. He's fusing algebra and geometry, an insight that will later lead to Cartesian coordinates, the foundation of modern mathematics. Yes, the X and Y on every graph you've ever drawn started right here, under these blankets. That's your historical fact, tidy and world-changing. Descartes' merging of algebra and geometry laid the groundwork for analytic geometry, and he thought of it, apparently, while lying in bed. He taps the quill against his teeth, eyes narrowing. Maybe, he thinks, the entire universe is a kind of equation, unknowns waiting to be solved. You smile at the thought. He's not wrong. And yet, it's such a human moment. Genius emerging from boredom. The morning deepens into late day, and Descartes finally sits up. He hasn't eaten since dawn. The sheets are tangled, and his mind is buzzing. He's tired, but it's that pleasant kind of fatigue that follows a long mental sprint. He doesn't yet know that this lazy morning will someday be retold, as the day philosophy reinvented itself. He just knows that something new has begun. He's learned to doubt, not out of despair, but out of curiosity. To question is to clear the fog from truth. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft as thought itself. You imagine the flakes settling on the roof tiles, muffling the world even more. And you, lying there in your own bed, centuries later, feel the same hush. The sense that maybe it's okay not to have answers yet. That sometimes the most productive thing you can do is stay under the covers and think. The day drifts onward, and the room grows dim again. That grayish light of afternoon softening everything into gentle blur. You're still beside him. The fire a low glow now, its warmth ebbing into the wool blanket. Descartes is still in bed, naturally, but the energy around him feels different, less dreamlike, more deliberate. It's the phase of any deep thinker's day when idle wondering crystallizes into doodling. And in Descartes' case, those doodles are about to redraw how the world sees itself. He props a board across his knees, smooths a scrap of parchment, and dips his quill. A few loose crumbs fall onto the page, bits of bread, maybe a dot of wax. He flicks them away and begins sketching. A line here, a circle there. Just shapes at first, like a mathematician's absent-minded graffiti. But each mark has rhythm. He's thinking in silence, counting in his head, his lips moving faintly as though whispering to himself. You, watching from across centuries, can't help but smile. There's something charming about the fact that one of the world's greatest intellectual revolutions began in a messy bed, with a man muttering numbers into a pillow. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Descartes was already obsessed with mathematics long before he ever published his Meditations. By his 20s, he'd studied the works of ancient geometers and was searching for a universal method, something that could unite algebra, numbers, and geometry, shapes. The moment of insight came when he realized that a point on a plane could be described not just by intuition, but by precise coordinates, distances measured along perpendicular lines. That idea, analytic geometry, would become known as the Cartesian plane. But let's not rush him there yet. He's still sketching, and as he draws, you see something lovely. The way his lines aren't perfectly straight, the ink a little uneven, the edge of the quill slightly frayed. It reminds you that even perfection begins imperfectly. He shifts, reaches for another page, and begins to scrawl letters. A, B, C, labeling points, connecting lines. Somewhere between geometry and dream, an entire new language of space is forming. Then, there's a sneeze, dust from the parchment, or maybe the chill air sneaking in from the shutters. He groans softly, wipes his nose with his sleeve. Yes, philosophers are human, and mutters something in French you thankfully don't understand. There's a moment of stillness again, the kind that only comes after sneezing in a silent room. He studies his drawing and smiles faintly. He's found a pattern, something both visual and numerical. The mind loves when math and picture overlap, because it feels like discovering harmony where chaos used to be. And that, oddly enough, becomes a metaphor for Descartes' entire philosophy. He believes the world can be mapped, not just physically, but mentally. That every experience, every thought, every little crumb of reality can be placed somewhere on a grand coordinate system of truth. Now, for your quirky tidbit. An old story claims that Descartes used to carry a small slate board everywhere he traveled, so he could jot down ideas in bed without fumbling for ink. Supposedly, once, while staying at an inn, a chambermaid thought his strange symbols were occult runes, and nearly burned them. She was stopped just in time, and he had to explain, awkwardly, that he was doing math, not summoning demons. Historians doubt the tale, of course, but it's exactly the kind of misunderstanding a man like Descartes might invite. Half scientist, half sorcerer, and wholly incomprehensible before breakfast. He chuckles to himself, perhaps at some mental pun about lines intersecting and souls colliding. Then, as if noticing how his ink-stained fingers tremble, he pauses. Thinking can be exhausting, especially when your body's been still all day. His hand feels stiff. He stretches it toward the fire, letting warmth crawl up his arm. Even my hand, he muses softly. Obi's a pattern. Historians still argue whether Descartes' concept of the mechanical body, the idea that physical matter, including human flesh, behaves like machinery, began in this period or later, after years of medical study. But this morning's doodles already show a glimpse of it. A fascination with how the abstract and the tangible fit together. You notice how he keeps glancing between his fingers and the lines on the page, as though comparing anatomy and geometry. What if the same logic that explains the motion of a circle could explain the movement of a muscle? It sounds simple now, but in 1619, it was daring. Blending math and biology was like mixing oil and holy water. Outside, a horse clops by. Inside, Descartes scratches another note. There is nothing in the world so hidden that reason cannot uncover it. It's both a vow and a prayer. And here comes your second small laugh of the night. If Descartes were alive today, he'd probably spend hours on Reddit debating strangers about whether numbers are real. Then he'd leave halfway through, muttering, "I think, therefore I mute." But in this moment, it's all pure focus. The room is quiet except for quill and breath. The ink blots at the edge of his page look like constellations, the firelight shimmering across them, as if hinting that the universe, too, is one big pattern waiting for coordinates. He doesn't know yet that the method he's developing, this way of organizing space and certainty, will change not just philosophy, but physics, architecture, astronomy, and eventually computer graphics. Right now, he's just curious. That's the funny part. The world often shifts because someone was too lazy to stand up and too restless to stop thinking. You can almost feel his satisfaction as he studies the diagram again, the neatness of it, the way an invisible idea has taken physical shape. He traces a line with his fingertip, whispers something about ratios. The candle gutters, shadows pool in the corners. The day's nearly done, and yet it feels like something immense has begun. He yawns. His hand hovers over the page one last time, then sets the quill aside. His bed is littered with papers now, all speckled with ink dots, breadcrumbs, and possibly the early foundation of centuries of mathematics. He lies back, staring at the ceiling beams, feeling the faint pulse of his own mind like a soft echo. You can imagine him thinking, the mind draws lines the body cannot see. You let the words drift through you. The same cozy hum that filled his room fills yours. A sense that thought, even in stillness, is motion. That maybe you don't have to move to make progress. And then, just before he drifts into another nap, he chuckles once more. Because somewhere between the crumbs, the coordinates, and the candlelight, he's realized that bed isn't such a bad place to change the world. The light fades, slipping from the shutters in soft threads, and the candle's small flame takes command of the room. You're still there with him, hovering just outside his thoughts as he curls beneath the heavy wool blanket, still unwilling to get up. The sketches of circles and lines scatter the bedside table, but Descartes' attention drifts elsewhere now, not toward geometry, but toward the strange and slippery feeling of certainty. His body's warm, his mind restless. He closes his eyes and lets the world dim entirely. What happens when you stop trusting everything you think you know? That's the real question now. The one that creeps in when the fire lowers and the familiar blur of the day loses its edges. You can sense it. His heartbeat slows, his breathing softens, and yet inside, the machinery of logic clicks awake. You've had those nights yourself. The kind where your mind refuses to rest until it's chased one thought too far. For him, that thought is simple and dangerous. What if everything I believe is wrong? Here's your mainstream historical fact to anchor us. Descartes would later call this his method of doubt. It became the backbone of his meditations on first philosophy, 1641, where he proposed that knowledge must start from a single, indubitable foundation. To build that foundation, he had to strip away everything uncertain, beliefs, senses, even the reality of the world itself. But right now, he's still in bed, inventing the process not through writing, but through imagining. You can almost see the flicker of thought across his face. If sight can deceive, if dreams can mimic reality, if touch and taste can betray, then what remains? He wiggles his fingers again, almost testing whether they're real. What if, he murmurs, this is all illusion? And that's where his methodic doubt begins, not as a cold intellectual theory, but as a cozy act of procrastination. The refusal to get up becomes the refusal to accept things at face value. He's lying there saying, in essence, I'll get up once I'm sure the floor exists. You can't help but smile. It's philosophy's laziest power move. Outside, a gust rattles the shutters, and for a second, the candle quivers. The room feels uncertain. Shadows stretch and flicker in confusing ways. He notices, of course. See? He might whisper to himself. Even light lies. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. According to one anecdote, Descartes liked to lie in bed with his eyes covered by a cloth to focus better on pure thought, cutting out sensory distractions so he could imagine ideas more vividly. His servants supposedly found it unnerving. They called it his thinking nap. Whether that's true or not, it fits perfectly with the picture we're building. A man constructing an entire universe from the comfort of his sheets. Now, as the fire crackles, he decides to run a small mental test. Imagine, he thinks, that a painter wants to create a perfect illusion. a portrait so vivid that it feels alive. If that's possible in art, what if the senses are just paintings of reality? Accurate in parts, but deceptive as a whole. You've seen it yourself, right? How dreams can seem perfectly real until the alarm shatters them. He's starting to suspect that waking life is just another dream, one with more consistent lighting. Historians still argue whether Descartes' obsession with illusion came from his early scientific work with optics or from mystical traditions circulating through European circles at the time. Some claim he was influenced by late Renaissance occultism. Others say it was simply the logical conclusion of his Jesuit training. Either way, his doubt doesn't sound like despair. It's more like curiosity in overdrive. He rolls onto his side, face pressed into the pillow, and whispers, "To know truth, I must first know what I cannot trust." That line hangs in the air, soft and steady. The candle wobbles again. He doesn't flinch. Doubt, to him, isn't chaos. It's cleansing. A way to sweep away the clutter so that something pure can stand. And here comes the first little laugh of the section. You imagine Descartes today, scrolling through news headlines, trying to find something certain. Poor man wouldn't last 5 minutes on social media before declaring, "I doubt, therefore I deactivate." He sits up slightly, draws the blanket around his shoulders, and picks up one of his earlier sketches. The neat lines look different now. What once felt solid seems suspicious. The very concept of a straight line depends on perception, on eyes, rulers, angles. How can he know it's truly straight? He closes his eyes and tries to imagine perfect straightness, something that doesn't exist in nature but can be conceived by reason. That's his first glimpse of what he'll later call clear and distinct ideas, concepts so pure that they can't be doubted. The candle sputters low. The room smells faintly of cooling wax and ash. You might call it peaceful, except for the strange tension humming underneath. Descartes' doubt isn't comfortable. It's the kind that stretches the mind until it starts to glow from the inside. And yet, it's oddly cozy watching him do it. Maybe because you've had those moments yourself, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether the day you just lived was real, or whether memory is just your brain sketching a flattering self-portrait. He sighs, long and quiet. He's not frightened by uncertainty. He's intrigued. The more unstable things feel, the more determined he becomes to find one thing, just one, that can't be taken away. Here's your second soft laugh. You imagine his housekeeper later on, coming in to find her employer still in bed, muttering about existence, and thinking, "Ah, yes, another productive day for Monsieur Descartes." He leans back again, eyes half closed, whispering lines to himself that will someday become famous. He doesn't know that yet, of course. To him, it's just thinking out loud. But you can feel the weight of history pressing gently around him, like an extra blanket. The room's temperature drops, and the fire's almost out. He doesn't mind. The cold helps him focus. Thought for him is heat enough. And so, the method continues, looping and looping, like a lullaby. What can I know for sure? What if all I've learned deceives me? What if I'm dreaming? What if there's something that can't be doubted, even in a dream? Those questions hum softly under the candlelight. They sound almost like breathing. You shift under your own covers, feeling that same rhythm. You too have your little doubts. Different, perhaps, but born of the same need to feel solid ground. And that's the quiet magic of this night. The realization that a single man's insomnia 4 centuries ago mirrors your own. Descartes finally lets his eyes close again. His mind is buzzing, but his body relaxes. The last thing you hear before the candle gives its final sigh is his voice, almost inaudible. Maybe the first truth is simply that I am here, thinking, then darkness, then silence, and somehow, even in that silence, the questions remain alive. The room is pitch dark now, except for the faint afterglow of coals in the hearth. Outside, the wind has picked up, brushing against the window panes in long, cold breaths. You can almost hear the old timbers creak under the weight of the German winter. Descartes lies awake, still in bed, the outlines of the world barely visible. A blur of shadow and warmth, and the quiet rasp of fabric when he shifts beneath the blanket. Sleep hovers near him but refuses to land, and into that silence creeps something stranger than the cold. Doubt has called forth its own reflection. You know that feeling, the half-dream moment when your thoughts start inventing voices that aren't quite your own? Descartes feels it too. The more he doubts the world, the more the world seems to doubt him back. And in that flickering edge between waking and dreaming, he imagines, just for a moment, a presence, something unseen but deliberate, not a god of comfort, but a shadow that thrives on confusion, a deceiver. Yes, here it is, the famous Mélangenie, the evil genius who could twist every thought, forge every sensation, make even arithmetic uncertain. Descartes doesn't call him Satan or the devil. He's subtler than that. This being exists only as an idea, the pure embodiment of deception. Your mainstream historical fact for this section. In the Meditations, Descartes introduces the concept of the evil demon, or Mélangenie, as a final, most radical stage of doubt. If even mathematics could be the trick of such a deceiver, then what, if anything, could remain certain? Now, imagine how that must feel to him here, in this dim room, where the fire dies and the walls moan with the cold. His mind has dismantled everything, sight, sound, body, even reason, and left him alone with a whisper of possibility that everything, every single thing, might be false. He tightens the blanket around him, not out of fear. Well, maybe a little, but because he's testing himself. The more fragile reality feels, the more he wants to find the one thing that can't crumble. You might think of the evil demon as philosophy's first horror story, a bedtime ghost conjured for the sake of logic. But there's humor in it too, because Descartes doesn't panic. He negotiates. All right, he mutters half aloud. Let's suppose you are fooling me. Then at least there must be a me to fool. And there it is, the faint dawn of certainty hiding inside the nightmare. But the night isn't done playing. The wind presses hard against the shutters, and he flinches at the sudden crack of wood. For a split second, it feels like the room itself is testing him, throwing sounds and chills his way just to see if he'll cave. You know that twitchy awareness, the mind turning ordinary noises into omens. Now for your quirky tidbit. One minor 17th century biographer claimed that Descartes once told a friend he'd battled a literal demon in a dream during his student years, who tried to lure him into false light. The story was later dismissed as myth, but it likely inspired, or at least dramatized, his metaphor of the deceiving spirit. Whether or not it happened, it certainly fits the tone of this dark night. He lies still, breath shallow. The cold air feels like the breath of that imagined demon. Every creak becomes an accusation. And yet, through it all, his mind keeps moving. Steady, curious, relentless. Historians still argue whether Descartes' demon was just rhetorical, you whisper, or if he genuinely feared being tricked by his own senses. Some scholars call it a metaphor for intellectual humility. Others think it was rooted in the mystical anxieties of his age. Whatever the case, he turned that fear into a tool, a psychological workout for certainty. And maybe that's why you find this moment oddly soothing. Because Descartes isn't lost in paranoia. He's practicing calm within uncertainty. A mental exercise you've probably done yourself on long nights when your own thoughts won't behave. He exhales. The demon, if it ever existed, fades a little. He realizes something profound in the quiet. Even if the world were a deception, even if some cosmic prankster pulled every string, there's still someone thinking these thoughts. The very act of being deceived proves that there's a subject to deceive. He smiles in the dark, not triumphantly, more like someone who's found a single ember glowing under ashes. Here comes your first small laugh. Imagine Descartes explaining this demon theory to a modern therapist. So, you believe an evil genius might be deceiving you? Yes. And how does that make you feel? Logically consistent. It's absurd. But in that absurdity, you see how powerful his calm is. Doubt doesn't paralyze him. It clarifies him. The night deepens. The cold settles in like another layer of thought. Descartes' eyelids grow heavy, but his mind still hums with possibility. He knows he's close to something. A thought so sharp and simple that no demon, no dream, no doubt could pierce it. For a moment, he pictures the demon's face, not monstrous, but sly, curious, maybe even amused. Because what is philosophy, if not wrestling with your own imagination and pretending it's someone else's fault? Then another laugh, softer this time. If there is a demon, he thinks, he must be terribly bored with me. You can almost see him smirk in the dark. He's beginning to enjoy the absurdity of it all. The fact that radical doubt leads to strange companionships, even imaginary ones. Somewhere outside, a dog barks. The wind sighs again, and Descartes drifts closer to the discovery that will anchor everything. He's no longer afraid of the deceiver. He's talking to it like an old friend, saying, "You can trick me about the world, but you can't trick me about the fact that I'm thinking." The thought feels like a small sunrise breaking behind his eyes, the kind of realization that changes not just philosophy, but what it means to exist. He doesn't write it down yet. He just lets it hover in the air, fragile and bright. And as the darkness folds around him again, you can almost feel the warmth of that certainty, like a spark in your own chest, because deep down, you know the feeling too. That quiet victory over fear, the realization that no matter how uncertain the world gets, you're still here, still thinking, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The morning creeps in quietly, the faintest light brushing the edges of the room like a sigh. Descartes hasn't moved much. His bed looks like a battlefield of ideas, pages scattered like fallen soldiers, the air faintly smoky from the fire that gave up hours ago. But something in him has shifted. His eyes open, slow but steady, and a faint smile creeps over his face. The demon, the doubt, the darkness, they've all done their work. Because now, beneath all that questioning, something small and steady glows like the first ember of a new sun. You, still there beside him, can almost feel the change in the air. It's thicker somehow, charged with a quiet realization. Descartes stretches, and his voice breaks the silence in a whisper that history will remember, though it will take him years to write it down properly. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He doesn't shout it. He doesn't even write it immediately. He just lets it float there, fragile and perfect, the kind of truth that feels like breathing after being underwater. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Cogito, ergo sum first appeared in Descartes' Discourse on the Method, 1637. Written in French rather than Latin, so that ordinary readers could follow his reasoning, it distilled years of work into a single phrase, the bedrock of modern rationalism. But here, in this dim, drafty room, the phrase isn't yet a slogan. It's a whisper of survival. You imagine how it dawns on him. He's doubted the world, doubted his body, doubted mathematics, doubted even his own senses. But the very act of doubting proves that there's a mind doing the doubting, even if he's wrong about everything else. This one fact remains unshakable. Thinking is proof of being. He laughs softly, a small, incredulous sound, like someone finding treasure in the dark. So, he murmurs, I exist, at least as a thought. There's comfort in that, strange as it sounds. To realize that existence doesn't need physical proof. It just needs awareness. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some later commentators, probably apocryphal, but entertaining, claim that Descartes first said something closer to Je pense, donc je suis couché, meaning I think, therefore I am in bed. The story's clearly tongue-in-cheek, but it's an irresistible image. The father of modern philosophy, celebrating existence while still refusing to get up. He swings his legs off the bed, just for a moment, and plants his feet on the cold wooden floor. The sensation surprises him, sharp, grounding. He flexes his toes, as if testing whether his body's still part of the deal. Historians still argue whether the cogito was meant as a literal proof of existence, or as a more subtle insight, a kind of mental checkpoint in a longer chain of reasoning. But right now, in this small room, it feels simple. A single thread of certainty woven through a sea of uncertainty. He stands briefly, stretches, then immediately sits back down. The bed creaks, the parchment crinkles. Too early, he mutters, and you almost hear him chuckle. The man just proved his own existence, and still can't be bothered to leave the blankets. There's a strange beauty in that, isn't there? The idea that the world's most profound affirmation of being was discovered in a moment of half-wakeful stubbornness. He picks up a quill and writes a single line. The ink glides smoothly, steady, and sure. Je pense, donc je suis. He stares at the words, the simplicity of them. No geometry, no scripture, no grand argument. Just thought itself, naked and undeniable. Then he does something very human. He doubts it again. But if I'm thinking, he muses aloud. What is doing the thinking? A body? A soul? A machine? That question will haunt him for decades, and it will haunt philosophers forever after. You can almost hear the echo of it through time, how mind and body became the twin poles of Western philosophy. He lies back again, head sinking into the pillow. If thinking proves I exist, he whispers, then what am I? Now here's your second small laugh. If you've ever woken up on a Monday morning, stared at the ceiling, and asked that exact question, congratulations, you and Descartes have something in common. He starts to reason through it. The body can deceive. Dreams prove that. But the mind, pure and internal, cannot be doubted the same way. Even if it's mistaken, it exists as a mistake. The mind, therefore, must be the essence of self. The body, just a temporary vessel, an occasionally unreliable ride-along. That's how it starts. The famous split between mind and body, spirit and matter. He's not trying to separate them out of arrogance. He's doing it because the mind, for him, is the only safe island left after the storm of doubt. He closes his eyes again and pictures it. A single point of consciousness floating in darkness, bright and unassailable. That's him. The thinker. The observer. And maybe you feel a flicker of that too. In the quiet of your own thoughts. The awareness that, beneath every uncertainty, something solid remains. The candle has burned down to a stub. A small pool of wax glows faintly near his notes. He doesn't move to fix it. He's too deep in the hum of discovery. The phrase "I think, therefore I am" repeats softly in his mind like a heartbeat, or maybe a lullaby. He imagines how it might sound centuries later, rolling off tongues in classrooms, whispered by students, quoted by poets, parodied by comedians. He doesn't know yet that it will outlive him, that it will survive revolutions, rewritings, and misunderstandings. He just knows it feels true. And in that moment, you realize how small truth can be. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in quietly, through the cracks of a sleepless night. He stretches once more, pulls the blanket up to his chin, and lets the thoughts settle deep. "I am," he whispers, smiling. "And that's enough for now." You lie there too, matching his breath, feeling the same fragile peace, an understanding that existence isn't earned, it's simply known. The fire's gone, the morning is pale, and the bed that once held uncertainty now holds the calm of being. Maybe the world outside is still a dream. Maybe the demon's still lurking somewhere. But for now, Descartes has built a small island of certainty, a warm, flickering truth at the heart of the dark. And on that island, thought and being are one. The morning outside is brighter now, thin beams of sunlight cutting through the shutters, tracing pale golden lines across the sheets. You can hear faint movement from the street below, wheels on cobblestone, a horse's impatient snort, and somewhere, the muffled chatter of servants exchanging gossip. The world is waking up, but Descartes isn't rushing anywhere. He's sitting up in bed now, the blanket still over his lap, holding one of his notes close to the window light. His hand trembles slightly, not from cold, but from the quiet thrill of discovery. He looks different, though not in any grand cinematic way. There's no halo of genius, no angelic choir. Just that steady, inward satisfaction of someone who's found the first piece of a very big puzzle. "I think, therefore I am," he whispers again, as if testing the sound of it against the room's hush. You're still with him, watching. The fire's gone out completely now, replaced by sunlight. The air smells of ash and old paper, a kind of intellectual morning perfume. And for the first time, he starts thinking beyond himself. If I can know my own existence through thought, he muses, then maybe other truths can be built the same way. Step by step, certainty by certainty. He leans back, sighs, and does something almost mundane. He reaches for the small cup of coffee left by his servant, now cold, but still potent. A sip. A grimace. Cold truth, he mutters, but truth nonetheless. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Descartes was known for his letter writing. He communicated his developing ideas through an enormous correspondence network that stretched across Europe. Among his frequent correspondents were thinkers like Marie Mersenne, Pierre Gassendi, and Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. These letters, written often in the quiet of morning hours, sometimes from bed, helped shape early modern philosophy as much as any printed book. In a way, Descartes invented remote philosophy. Long before Zoom debates or Twitter threads, there were months-long exchanges of handwritten thought experiments sent by courier, sealed with wax and patience. Now, for your quirky tidbit. Rumor has it that Descartes sometimes perfumed his letters with a faint scent of orange peel and lavender, partly to mask the musty smell of old paper, and partly, perhaps, to make his thoughts smell civilized. Whether true or not, it's a charming image. The great rationalist scenting his logic. He dips his quill and begins to write, murmuring as he does. To my friend Mersenne, he begins. The letters that follow are half report, half confession. The doubts, the dreams, the method. He tells them of his decision to start from scratch, to rebuild all knowledge from the ground up. He doesn't mention that the ground was, technically, a feather mattress. Historians still argue whether these early letters contained the seeds of his later works, or if he exaggerated their importance after the fact. But one thing's certain. Descartes' ideas began spreading long before he published them. His bed became a launchpad for ideas that would ripple across salons, academies, and universities for generations. As he writes, you notice something endearing about his posture. His shoulders hunch, his head dips low, his mouth moves as he phrases each sentence. It's not the dramatic pose of a thinker conquering the cosmos. It's a man trying to express the unsayable with careful handwriting and half-warm ink. He pauses now and then to blow gently on the page, the breath fogging the air in front of him. You can almost feel the texture of the parchment, the scratch of the quill, the rhythm of thought turned physical. And here's your first small laugh. Imagine how those letters would read if Descartes had autocorrect. I think, therefore I am't. Delete, delete. He sets the quill aside and stretches again. The room's brighter now, and for the first time, he opens the shutters fully. The light spills in, and he squints, blinking. Outside, the sky is an impossible blue, the rooftops glistening from a dusting of frost. People are moving. The city is alive. And Descartes, sitting there in his nightshirt, realizes he's been absent from it all for days. He watches a child pull a sled down the street, a dog trotting behind. The world looks simple, solid, unbothered by doubt. For a moment, he envies that simplicity. They just are, he murmurs, smiling. No proofs required. Then, because he can't help himself, he adds softly, but they think too. The mind never stops. Now, as he continues writing, the letters take on a new tone. Confident but not boastful. He's found a foothold, and he wants to share it. My dear friend, he writes, I've discovered a method so certain that even if all the world conspired to deceive me, it could not shake what I know of myself. You imagine Mersenne, miles away in Paris, reading that line weeks later, raising an eyebrow, and thinking how René has been spending too much time indoors. Historians still debate how seriously his contemporaries took him at first. Some admired the boldness of his clarity. Others found it dangerously solitary. This idea of starting from nothing but the self. To some theologians, it sounded suspiciously close to heresy, but to others, it sounded like liberation. And here's your second laugh of the section. If you think Descartes was controversial on paper, imagine him on Twitter. Reality might not exist. Cue 500 angry replies and a sponsored ad for meditation apps. He folds the letter neatly, drips a bead of wax onto it, presses his seal, and sets it aside. One thought shared, 1,000 yet to go. Then he leans back again, watching the sunlight slide across the floor. The room feels gentler now. The cold that haunted him during his nights of doubt seems to have retreated. The bed, unmade and cluttered with papers, looks less like a fortress and more like a ship that's finally caught wind. He closes his eyes and imagines the letters making their journey across Europe, through muddy roads, across rivers, from hand to hand, thought traveling without him, his quiet revolution carried by paper and wax and curiosity. You realize then that this too is a kind of proof, not logical, but human. To share thought is to affirm existence. To send an idea into the world is to say, I am here, and I want you to be here with me. The candlelight of the previous nights might have birthed certainty, but daylight brings communication. Philosophy leaves the bed, at least metaphorically. He sips his coffee again, grimaces, then laughs softly. I think, therefore, I need better coffee. It's a good line to end the morning on. He stands finally, fully upright, stretches his arms, and looks at the mess around him. Papers, ink, blankets, crumbs. A life half-lived horizontally. But somehow, in all that stillness, he's already set the world in motion. Outside, bells toll the hour. He doesn't rush to dress. He just stands there for a while, feeling the sunlight on his face, the faint ache in his legs, the soft hum of certainty beneath his ribs. He's proven he exists. Now, he's beginning to enjoy it. The sunlight has stretched itself fully into the room now, warming the boards, gilding the papers, and throwing gentle light onto Descartes' ink-stained hands. You can see the dust particles dancing in the air, tiny constellations drifting above his half-finished notes. He stands, yawns, and surveys the chaos around him. Equations in the margins, little triangles, strange sketches of circles intersecting grids. The bed, still unmade, has become a landscape of geometry. He moves slowly, as if each step must pass through several layers of thought before landing. Somewhere between the physical and the mathematical, he's decided that the bed isn't just a resting place anymore. It's a workshop, a laboratory, a miniature universe for testing ideas. He sits again, brushes aside a crumpled page, and pulls a clean sheet toward him. The morning light makes his quill glint faintly. Let's see, he mutters. If thought alone can build the world, then it must obey laws. And that's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Descartes' belief that mathematics was the model for all certainty didn't stop at philosophy. In his Principles of Philosophy, 1644, he argued that the universe itself operates under mathematical order, that physical matter can be explained through motion and extension, not mystery. In essence, he gave the cosmos a coordinate system, one that would pave the way for modern physics. Now imagine him discovering that insight here, in this soft, messy room, where the blankets are as rumpled as the curvature of space-time itself. He pulls one corner of the sheet and smooths it out, tracing invisible lines on the fabric with his finger. You can almost see him mapping out the universe right there on his blanket. Folds as hills, seams as boundaries, creases as dimensions. He's humming now, quietly. An old French melody from childhood. Something about morning light and fields. It's the sound of a man thinking through tune rather than language. And here comes your quirky tidbit. There's an obscure note from one of Descartes' later acquaintances who swore that the philosopher once described the universe as God's geometry. When pressed to explain, he supposedly said, "The world is written in number, and God is the compass." Historians debate whether he actually said it, but the phrasing feels like him, half scientist, half poet, unwilling to separate awe from calculation. He sets down the quill for a moment and looks at the light pattern across the floor. He imagines it like a graph. Each beam, a straight line, intersecting angles at measurable degrees. He feels a peculiar calm knowing that what the senses perceive, light, warmth, motion, can be translated into the language of reason. Hos, not Everyone would agree. Even now, 4 centuries later, some people flinch at the idea that reality could be so mathematical, so mechanical. Historians still argue whether Descartes' approach made the world clearer or colder, whether turning matter into motion and extension stripped it of its soul. You shift a little in your own bed, thinking about it. Maybe the world is both a machine and a mystery, precision dressed in poetry. Descartes, meanwhile, dips his quill again. He's drawing more lines, crossing, looping, intersecting. The parchment looks like a small galaxy. His handwriting curls around the figures, forming a strange dance between language and mathematics. You realize that's what makes him special. He's the bridge between feeling and formula, between the comfort of certainty and the wonder of the unknown. He scratches at his jaw absently. The faint sound of the quill on parchment blends with the ticking of a small travel clock by his bedside. The air smells of ink and wool and faint smoke. It's the smell of thinking. Here's your first small laugh for the section. If you tried to explain this moment to him, that 400 years later, people would still be using his coordinate system to design video games and 3D models. He'd probably blink and say, "Ah, so you build dreams with mathematics too." The fire, long dead, leaves a bed of faint orange ash in the hearth. Descartes stares at it, mesmerized by how predictably it fades. There's comfort in predictability. In a world where senses lie and dreams deceive, motion obeys laws. He jots down a note. Physics is but geometry in motion. Then, smiling faintly, he adds, "The bed may rest, but the world does not." It's such a small, wry joke, half serious, half self-aware. You can picture him pausing afterward, amused at himself for turning laziness into philosophy again. He stands briefly, stretching his legs, and crosses to the small window. The light outside has shifted. Afternoon now, pale and steady. He opens the latch just enough to feel the breeze. It carries the faint scent of wood smoke and distant bread baking. Somewhere, a church bell rings. He murmurs. The bell moves the air moves the ear, and thought moves through it. That's how he sees everything now. Connections, cause and effect, rhythm and rule. Even the sound of a bell becomes part of his grand diagram of the universe. You watch him and can't help but marvel. This man, who once doubted the very floor beneath him, now finds beauty in its predictability. The pendulum has swung from skepticism to structure. Doubt cleared the fog, and mathematics gave him the map. He returns to his writing, filling the page with calm precision. There's something meditative about it. The way the nib scratches, the way ink pools at the edges of his loops. You could almost fall asleep to the sound. The steady tempo of mind meeting matter. Your second soft laugh arrives when you realize that Descartes might be the only person in history to prove both that he exists and that the blanket covering him can be modeled as a topological surface. He's that kind of multitasker. As the afternoon fades, he gathers the papers into a neat stack. He ties them with a string, then smooths the blanket again, restoring a fragile sense of order to the chaos he's made. He looks around one last time. The geometric doodles, the ink stains, the faint smell of burnt wick. It's not just a room anymore. It's a map of his own awakening. He sits back down, eyes closed, letting the hum of reason fill the silence. The mind, he realizes, is its own architecture, solid, measurable, infinite. And as the day slides into evening again, you can almost feel the balance returning between thought and rest, chaos and clarity. Descartes may not have gotten out of bed, but in his own quiet way, He's given the universe structure. And you? You're right there with him, feeling the rhythm of thought turn into calm, the chaos of existence settling into order. Maybe the world is mathematical, maybe not. But right now, everything aligns. The breath, the light, the steady pulse of awareness that says softly, "You are." By the next morning, the air in the little German room feels heavier. The frost on the shutters has melted into soft trickles, whispering down the glass, and the scent of damp wood lingers in the corners. Descartes sits upright in bed, the blanket still draped over his knees, a quill resting against his lips. His mind, always eager to turn inward, has drifted now from the mathematics of the world to something far stranger, the mathematics of himself. You can feel that same pull, the curiosity that makes you glance inward when the world outside feels too loud. The day before had been about clear lines and rational order. Today, though, the mind begins to wander again toward the body that holds it. He flexes his fingers, then rubs his wrists slowly. "This," he whispers, "is matter. It moves when I command it." But who commands? That's the question. The kind that sounds simple until you actually try to answer it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Descartes famously proposed to mind body dualism. The idea that the mind, the thinking, immaterial substance, and the body, the extended physical substance, are distinct but somehow interact. It's one of the most influential and controversial concepts in Western philosophy. He didn't arrive at it through detached reasoning alone. It grew out of days like this, quiet mornings, small gestures, the tension between thinking and feeling. You can almost see him experimenting with himself. He pinches the skin on his arm lightly, watches the color fade and return. "The body reacts," he murmurs, "but the thought of pain belongs elsewhere." His hand trembles slightly, but not from fear. He's curious. The mind feels its body, yet the body seems to exist outside of thought. He wonders, how does the immaterial move the material? Now for your quirky tidbit. One surviving anecdote claims that Descartes, fascinated by the idea of reflexes, dissected animal eyes in his lodging, an early exploration into how motion and perception worked mechanically. Some versions say he even tried to map the soul's connection to the body in the pineal gland, calling it the seat of the soul. Whether the experiments happened exactly that way is uncertain, but the myth captures his restless curiosity. You can imagine him now, gazing into a small mirror beside the bed, studying his own eyes as if they were equations. The reflection stares back. Same features, same flesh, but somehow the I that thinks feels separate from the I that appears. He sets the mirror aside and touches his chest, right where he imagines that mysterious gland to be. "Somewhere here," he murmurs. "Mind meets matter." Historians still argue whether Descartes' dualism was meant to divide or to connect. The question of how an immaterial mind could affect a physical body remains one of philosophy's enduring puzzles. Some think he intended a mystical bridge, others a purely mechanical one. Either way, he spent his life trying to make the invisible visible. You can almost hear him reasoning through it. If the body is like a machine, its parts moving by laws of motion, then consciousness is the operator, unseen but undeniable. The fire in the hearth crackles weakly, sending soft, uneven warmth across the floorboards. The scent of smoke mingles with that faint smell of ink and tallow. Descartes closes his eyes, places a hand on his chest again, and breathes deeply. And here comes your first small laugh. If Descartes had access to modern gym culture, you can imagine him standing by a treadmill muttering. The mind commands the legs to move, yet the legs protest. He opens his eyes again and looks down a blanket over his knees. He tugs it gently, watching the folds shift like waves. He thinks about motion again, how one thing influences another. The blanket responds to his will. His hand responds to thought, but thought itself, invisible, untouchable. He picks up a quill and writes, "The body is a machine, the mind its pilot," then pauses, frowning. It feels incomplete. He adds softly, "And yet, without the machine, the pilot drifts." It's strange, isn't it, that the man who gave the world perfect order is now grappling with the most intimate kind of chaos, the mystery of being both mind and flesh. You can sense the quiet conflict building in him. He stands, bare feet touching the cold boards, and shivers. The shock of the chill travels up his body like a sudden proof of existence. He laughs softly. "The body insists on reminding the soul that it's still here," he says. He takes a few steps, stretching, testing his balance. "You think," he murmurs, "but you also breathe. You ache, you hunger, you tire. And here's your second small laugh. If Descartes had a smartwatch, he'd probably use it not for fitness, but as empirical proof that his pulse exists independently of his doubt." He returns to bed, slightly flushed from the cold, and sits again. The boundary between mind and body feels blurrier than ever. He wonders if maybe his theory needs more warmth, more humility. After all, the thinking self isn't floating above the world. It's anchored in it. Outside, a wagon clatters past, shaking the glass panes. He looks up and watches how the vibration trembles through the room. He can feel the noise in his bones. And you, listening from across centuries, realize how intimate that is. The philosopher who began by doubting everything has stumbled back into embodiment, not as proof, but as participation. The body isn't just an instrument. It's the rhythm by which thought moves. The candlelight flickers again, casting twin shadows of him on the wall. One solid, one trembling. He watches them with the faintest smile. "Perhaps," he says softly, "the truth is that I am both." He stretches out once more, pulling the blanket to his chin. The bed creaks under him, the wood groaning like an old memory. He feels his heart beating beneath his palm and realizes that the rhythm of thought and the rhythm of life are not so separate after all. For a moment, the great philosopher lets the theory rest. He breathes. He listens to the soft whisper of the wind against the shutters. He feels the ache in his neck, the stiffness in his shoulders, the peace of his pulse slowing down. Maybe that's the secret his method can't capture, that knowing isn't only in thinking, but in being. He smiles faintly. "The mind may command," he murmurs, "but the body always has the last word." And with that, the fire gives one last sigh, a curl of smoke rising like a thought dissolving into sleep. Morning again, and this time it arrives softly, as though tiptoeing into the philosopher's room. The air feels gentler, touched by faint warmth, and the sound of distant bells floats through the mist. Descartes lies half awake, not quite ready to move, but not quite asleep either. A familiar rhythm by now. His mind hums with the afterglow of yesterday's thoughts about body and soul. But today something livelier stirs in the air. A knock at the door. He blinks, confused. He's not expecting anyone. For a moment, he wonders if he dreamed the sound. His senses are always under suspicion, after all. Then the knock comes again, softer this time, accompanied by a polite cough. He groans, tugs his blanket tighter, and calls out, "Oui, entrez." The door creaks open, and a small draft follows. Standing there, cloaked in traveling furs and mourning confidence, is a woman, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. Yes, that Elizabeth, the sharp, inquisitive mind who will one day challenge him with questions that unsettle even his carefully constructed logic. But right now, she's simply a visitor, curious and amused to find the great thinker exactly where rumor said he always was, still in bed. You can almost see her smile as she enters. "Monsieur Descartes," she says, "I was told I would find you deep in study. I didn't realize study required so many pillows." He sits up quickly, embarrassed but also secretly pleased. "Ah, Your Highness," he replies, pulling the blanket higher over his nightshirt. "The mind works best when the body is at rest." And there it is, the perfect rational excuse for lounging. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia was indeed one of Descartes' most important correspondents. Their letters, spanning over 6 years, discuss not just philosophy, but emotion, health, and the struggles of reconciling body and mind. She questioned him sharply, asking how an immaterial soul could move a physical body, a question that continues to echo in philosophy today. But here, in this imagined meeting, the conversation begins with something far more ordinary. Elizabeth walks slowly around the room, glancing at his scattered notes. "You make war upon ignorance," she says, "and yet I see no sign you've won any battles against clutter." He laughs softly, the sound low and genuine. "Order of the mind," he replies, "rarely matches order of the room." She picks up one of his papers, an intricate sketch of circles and axes, and studies it. "This," she says, "looks like the work of a mathematician, not a philosopher." "Both," he replies. "They are never far apart. Numbers give reason a skeleton." She tilts her head, considering him. "And what gives reason a heart?" The question lingers. It's the kind of thing that makes even Descartes pause. He gestures to a chair near the bed. "Please, sit. We can discuss both anatomy and metaphysics at once." She sits, carefully arranging her skirts. The sunlight catches the silver threads in her gown, casting little reflections across the floor. For a moment, the room feels less like a hermit's den and more like a salon. Ideas waiting to spark. Now, for your quirky tidbit. One surviving letter between them reveals that Descartes sent Elizabeth advice about managing melancholy, what he called the vapors of the spleen. His prescription? Moderate exercise, fresh air, and cheerful conversation. Not exactly cutting-edge psychiatry, but sweetly sincere for the 17th century. "Tell me," Elizabeth says now, "you speak of the soul moving the body, but surely you must feel that emotions do the same. When you are joyful, don't your hands move quicker? When you are sad, doesn't your body grow heavy?" Descartes smiles. "Yes, the body obeys the passions, though the mind should learn to master them." She raises an eyebrow. "And do you master yours?" He hesitates, caught. "Not always," he admits. "Sometimes the body is persuasive." You can feel the warmth in the room now, the playful kind, filled with mutual respect. She leans forward slightly, elbows on her knees. "And if you cannot command your own flesh, monsieur, how can your method command the universe?" He laughs again, shaking his head. "Touché, Your Highness." It's strange, but you realize that in this moment, Descartes is more human than the cold logician history sometimes paints. He's blushing slightly, fumbling with his quill, smiling in that shy, crooked way of people unaccustomed to being teased. Historians still argue whether there was affection beyond intellect between Descartes and Elizabeth. Most say no, It was mutual admiration, not romance. But you can't help but sense a gentle energy between them. Two minds orbiting, testing, drawing closer without colliding. The princess picks up his coffee cup, wrinkles her nose, and says, "Cold." He grins. "Like my logic. Or your breakfast." They both laugh softly, the sound warm enough to fill the room. He begins explaining his method again. How clear and distinct ideas must guide reason. How emotion clouds the purity of knowledge. But she interrupts him gently. "And yet, if we didn't feel, what reason would we have to seek truth at all?" He stops, smiles faintly. "Perhaps the passions are the compass, even if the mind is the map." Now here's your first small laugh. Imagine these two texting today. "Elizabeth, are you out of bed yet?" Descartes, "I doubt it." They talk for hours. About will, about God, about the strange machinery of the human heart. The conversation drifts like the morning light itself, measured, curious, gently teasing. When she finally rises to leave, he bows his head deeply. "You've given me more to think about than my own doubts," he says. She smiles. "Then my work here is done." As she exits, her footsteps fade down the corridor, leaving only silence behind. But it's a new kind of silence, brighter, alive with the echo of dialogue. Descartes looks at the half-empty coffee cup, at the sunlight spilling across the paper she touched, and murmurs, "Perhaps philosophy is best begun with company after all." He lies back again, but this time his rest feels earned. Outside, the day hums with the rhythm of life. Hooves, voices, bells. Inside, the bed is once again both fortress and cradle, holding a man whose thoughts have just been shaken by grace. He closes his eyes, smiling faintly. The world feels less mechanical now, still rational, but warm. Thought, he realizes, isn't just something that happens in solitude. Sometimes it needs another mind to knock on the door. The light of early afternoon slants through the windows now, warming the small room that has become Descartes' world. The bed, with its pile of papers, has been remade. Well, almost. A few notes and crumbs still cling to the sheets like old thoughts that refuse to leave. The conversation with Princess Elizabeth lingers in the air, still humming faintly in his mind. You can almost feel it too. The quiet after a visit, the way a single question keeps echoing long after the person who asked it has gone. He sits at the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. "The passions," he mutters. "Perhaps they are not enemies after all." And just like that, he's thinking again. This time not about himself but about others. About how ideas travel, how they spread beyond the small circle of correspondence and into the wide world. Because outside the cocoon of this little German lodging, something larger is brewing. Letters are being copied, scholars are talking, and slowly, without his planning it, the sleeping philosopher's method is waking Europe. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Descartes' ideas spread rapidly after the publication of Discourse on the Method in 1637 and Meditations in 1641. They were discussed in universities, dissected in salons, and condemned from pulpits. Cartesianism became both a movement and a scandal, an intellectual fashion that promised perfect clarity and yet invited endless debate. He didn't mean for it to become controversial. He just wanted to clean the fog off knowledge. But you know how ideas work. Once they leave their author's bed, they start making mischief on their own. He gets up, slowly, as though testing gravity again, and crosses to the window. Outside, the marketplace bustles. Merchants calling, wheels rattling, Snow beginning to fall again. Ordinary life carrying on, completely unaware that in a few short years, thinkers will be arguing in his name. He smiles faintly. So this is how thought travels, he murmurs, without passport or horse. You might imagine the scene beyond this quiet morning. Young students in Paris whispering about the man who doubts everything, old theologians frowning into their coffee, mathematicians suddenly realizing they can map space using his coordinates. His ideas slip under doors and across borders like gossip. And here's your quirky tidbit. For a time, certain religious schools actually banned discussion of Cartesian questions. Students caught mentioning cogito, ergo sum during lectures were fined a few sous for impiety. Imagine being penalized for thinking about thinking. The fines apparently didn't stop anyone. They only made the slogan more fashionable. Back in the little room, Descartes doesn't know any of this yet. He's still writing letters, still dreaming of clarity, still trying to balance mind and body. The idea of fame doesn't quite fit him. It's too loud, too external. He prefers the quiet order of the page. Yet the noise is coming, and you can almost hear it gathering. Philosophers inspired, theologians alarmed, scientists emboldened. It's like his own breath echoing outward, multiplied by 1,000 curious minds. Historians still argue whether the spread of Cartesianism was a blessing or a curse. Some say it liberated reason from superstition. Others claim it caged mystery inside logic. But everyone agrees on one thing. It changed how people saw themselves. For the first time, ordinary individuals began to think of the mind as something independent and powerful, not just a shadow of divine order. Descartes leans on the window frame, watching the fog roll across the rooftops. He feels both pleased and uneasy. If the method is sound, he whispers, it should belong to everyone, even those who disagree. You can almost picture him writing those words later to a friend, and then sealing the letter with wax, as though tucking a small truth into an envelope for the world to open slowly. Now comes your first soft laugh of the section. Imagine Descartes scrolling through the comment section of his own philosophy channel. Half the replies saying, genius. The other half saying, this man clearly doesn't exist. He chuckles quietly to himself, unaware that his jokes will one day become memes. His name turned into adjectives. Cartesian coordinates, Cartesian doubt, Cartesian dualism. The legacy he's building is already larger than his life. He turns from the window, pacing the room now, energy returning to his limbs. If thought can travel so far, he says softly, then perhaps certainty is not just mine. Perhaps it can belong to everyone who dares to doubt. That realization lifts him. The philosophy born in solitude begins to bloom into community. He imagines circles of thinkers debating in candlelit rooms, challenging, questioning, refining. For a man who began by distrusting the senses, he's oddly hopeful about humanity's collective mind. He settles back on the bed, thoughtful. The same sheets that once felt like an anchor now feel like a sail, ready to catch the wind of ideas. He closes his eyes and pictures them spreading outward. Lines drawn in chalk on university floors, scholars in Leiden and Amsterdam, gesturing wildly over arguments of extension and motion, young students defending their right to reason freely. And of course, resistance follows. The church eyes his ideas warily. Some call him dangerous. Others call him divine. He sighs. It seems every truth must choose its enemies. Now your second laugh. You can almost hear him muttering, I think, therefore I'm misunderstood. The candle beside him burns low, pooling wax around its base. The smell of smoke curls through the air again, faint and pleasant. He adds a note to one of his papers. Reason must never shout. It must persuade softly. It's a sentence that feels like advice for everyone who ever tried to change the world with words. He stretches out, the bed creaking softly. The world is spinning outside, but inside this room, everything has slowed into a steady hum. His philosophy, once a private experiment, has begun its long journey outward, like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. He listens to the muffled noise of the marketplace below, the chatter and laughter and haggling. It all feels strangely reassuring. The mind that doubted everything now takes comfort in the ordinary sounds of human life, continuing. Let them talk, he whispers. Every voice adds to the chorus of thought. He closes his eyes. The day outside brightens, and somewhere in Europe, a student copies his ideas onto a fresh sheet of parchment. The quiet revolution continues, even as its originator drifts back toward that gentle border between waking and sleep. The snow outside has thickened by the time the next phase of Descartes' wandering begins. He's older now, still neat, still precise, but softer around the edges. The bed in this new lodging creaks a little differently. The air smells of travel, damp wood, and foreign spice. He's no longer in Germany, but somewhere between journeys. Holland, perhaps, or Sweden soon enough. The years have folded him gently from soldier to philosopher, from solitude to correspondence, and now into something like exile. You can feel that change in the rhythm of the story. The room is different, but the pattern is the same. Quill, papers, candlelight, silence, always silence. Descartes sits with his travel cloak draped around his shoulders, a small fire flickering in the hearth. He's reading through one of his old notebooks. The same ideas he once scribbled half asleep in a German bed. And he smiles faintly at how much of the world has changed since then, and how much hasn't. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 1640s, Descartes moved repeatedly across the Dutch Republic, seeking quiet and protection from controversy. His philosophy had made both admirers and enemies. He published, taught, argued by letter, but always from a distance. By the late 1640s, he accepted an invitation from Queen Christina of Sweden to come to Stockholm as her tutor. It would be his last journey. He's not there yet, though. For now, he's in some small cold inn near the Rhine, where the wind groans through the beams like a tired singer. The quill trembles in his fingers. He's trying to write a new essay, but fatigue seeps in between sentences. He looks around the room. The cracked basin, the single candle, the bed that's too short for him. Hotels, he mutters, are proof that motion does not always equal progress. And here comes your first small laugh. If Descartes had Yelp, you can imagine the review. 3 stars. Too much reality, not enough reason. He sighs, rubs his eyes, and keeps writing. The topic tonight is knowledge, the kind that travels, the kind that gets lost. His letters are growing longer now, more personal, less concerned with eternal truth, and more with comfort, health, and faith. He's learned that philosophy is not immune to drafts and cold floors. He reaches for his trunk beside the bed, rummages through it, until he finds a small wooden box. Inside, a folded shirt, a comb, 2 books, and a bundle of old pages tied with string. His life's work reduced to the weight of a loaf of bread. He unties the string and finds something strange, a missing page. He frowns, shuffles through the bundle again. It's gone. Now for your quirky tidbit. A long-standing rumor claims that one of Descartes' manuscripts, perhaps a notebook or early draft of a lost essay, disappeared during his travels. Some said a servant misplaced it, others that a suspicious innkeeper confiscated it, thinking it heretical. Scholars still debate whether this lost manuscript ever existed, But the legend persists that somewhere a missing fragment of the Meditations lies forgotten in an attic or monastery archive. Descartes leans back on the bed, holding his chin. A page lost, he murmurs. Or perhaps it never existed. He chuckles softly. How fitting that the philosopher of doubt should doubt his own notes. Outside, the snow taps gently at the shutters. The world feels muffled, timeless. He picks up his cup of wine, thin, watery, and stares into it. The reflection looks older now. His hair, streaked with gray. His eyes, still bright but less certain. He thinks about home, about France, about the places he's left behind. Historians still argue whether Descartes was truly happy in his exile. Some say he relished the solitude, the freedom to think. Others claim he longed for companionship, that the loneliness gnawed at him in the later years. Whatever the truth, the wandering never stopped. His philosophy may have been built on clarity, but his life was lived in the fog of perpetual motion. He sets the cup down, stands, and paces the small room. The boards creak. The fire snaps. Every sound feels like company. Certainty, he whispers, is easier on paper than in flesh. The innkeeper downstairs shouts something in Dutch, probably about supper. Descartes doesn't answer. He's deep in another thought, one that moves slowly, almost tenderly. If the soul moves the body, he says aloud, then travel must tire the soul too. The wind answers for him, sighing through the cracks. He laughs softly. That's your second small joke. He's arguing with the weather again, which, in fairness, he's been doing since Germany. He sits back on the bed, pulls the blanket over his knees again. The sheets smell faintly of wood smoke and starch. He thinks of the lost page, then of all the pages that will outlive him. He imagines them traveling farther than he ever could. Translated, debated, perhaps misunderstood. But at least they'll move. Thought, after all, travels best when detached from the body. He closes his eyes and drifts for a moment into that half-sleep he loves, the one where ideas blend with dreams. In that in-between space, the room changes. The cracks in the wall look like rivers. The candle flame bends like a question mark. He imagines the missing page fluttering back through the door, carried by the wind, covered in new handwriting, not his own. The words are unfamiliar, but comforting. The thinker never truly leaves his bed. The bed becomes the world. He smiles faintly at the absurdity, yet there's truth in it. The bed where he first discovered his method has become a symbol. Rest and motion, doubt and certainty, all in one square of linen and thought. He murmurs, perhaps what I've lost will be found by another mind. The wind sighs again, and he takes it as agreement. The candle burns lower, the light turning amber, and for a moment the room feels eternal. Every inn he's ever stayed in blending into one. Every bed, the same bed. Every thought, the same dream unfolding. You realize then that his life, for all its travel, is a circle. He never really left that first morning of clarity. He just carried it with him, from country to country, sheet to sheet. He lies down fully now, pulling the blanket up to his chin. The fire crackles, the wine cools, and the philosopher, once the restless doubter, lets the night hold him again. Outside the snow thickens, erasing footprints, covering all the roads that led him here. Inside, his thoughts drift like the snow itself, soft, slow, settling quietly on everything he's built. By now, the years have folded over him like quiet pages. The restless soldier turned philosopher has become an older man, his hair silvered, his movements slower, But his eyes, those still flicker with the same feverish curiosity. The room is different again. Higher ceilings, colder air, the kind of neatness that comes not from comfort, but from discipline. Stockholm, winter, 1650. The Queen of Sweden, Christina, has summoned him to teach her philosophy. It sounded flattering when the letter arrived. A royal student, a fresh audience. But the truth, like the weather, has teeth. He sits now in a drafty chamber near the palace, the bed narrow and stiff, the light grey and cold. The mornings begin long before dawn. The Queen insists on lessons at 5 a.m. Descartes, who once believed the best ideas came while still under blankets, now finds himself bundled in heavy robes, stumbling through snow and dark corridors before sunrise. You can almost hear him grumbling softly to himself. I think, therefore I need a scarf. Here's your mainstream historical fact. René Descartes did indeed die in Stockholm in February 1650, only months after arriving. The cause was pneumonia, contracted during those brutally early mornings at Queen Christina's insistence. He had spent decades seeking solitude and reason. He found both, but in the end, they froze him. The philosopher who once built an empire of thought from the warmth of his bed would die in a bed that was not his own. He sits on it now, shivering slightly, a small candle flickering beside him. Papers lie on the table, but his writing is slower, shakier. The ink blots more easily. He coughs, folds a handkerchief, and stares at the stain it leaves. The Queen is kind if demanding, brilliant if restless. She wants to know everything: logic, metaphysics, virtue, the nature of mind and will. And Descartes, ever the patient teacher, obliges, though part of him longs for the quieter mornings in Holland, when his only student was silence. Now, for your quirky tidbit. One persistent story, likely exaggerated, claims that Queen Christina made him rise at 4:00 a.m. to meet her in an unheated library, where she preferred to study in the cold to keep the mind sharp. Descartes, more accustomed to soft beds and late mornings, supposedly muttered, "The body may serve the soul, but the soul protests." He coughs again, chuckling weakly at his own joke. Outside, snow falls thickly. None only mine. Outside, snow falls thickly. The window glass has frosted over, dimming the world into a pale blur. He wraps a blanket around his shoulders and gazes at the small crucifix on the wall. The body shivers. The mind endures. But even the mind begins to slow. Historians still argue about what killed him, whether it was pneumonia, exhaustion, or something darker. Some even suggest poison, though there's no real proof. What's certain is that his health had been declining for weeks. The once meticulous thinker now forgets small things: the date, the order of his letters, the warmth of sleep. He writes one more note to a friend, his hand unsteady, the ink trembling on the page. The cold, like doubt, seeps in everywhere. You can almost hear the weary humor behind it. The fire in his chamber burns low. The bed creaks as he lies down. He's thinner now, the sharpness of his features softened by fatigue. The method that once gave him structure now feels more like a lullaby, each layer of doubt and proof folding gently around him like sheets. He murmurs, "The mind is still clear. The body, less so." The nurse, a quiet woman from the palace staff, adjusts the blankets. "Rest, monsieur," she says softly. "The Queen will not summon you until tomorrow." He smiles faintly. Tomorrow is a word philosophers should not trust. That's your first small laugh of the section, and even he manages a weak chuckle. He closes his eyes and listens to the fire. The crackle sounds almost like rain. He pictures again that morning years ago in Germany, The young man who refused to get out of bed, staring at the frost on the window, building certainty out of confusion. What a strange symmetry. He began with frost and ends with it too. You can feel the weight of that thought, slow and inevitable, like a pendulum completing its swing. He whispers, "I think, therefore I am." The phrase that once sounded like conquest now feels like comfort. A statement, yes, but also a goodbye. The nurse adjusts the candle wick, and the light flares briefly, catching the edge of his papers. On the top page, a note scrawled earlier in the day reads, "The greatest mistake is to think certainty must be cold." He chuckles softly again. I suppose I'm correcting myself. Even now, historians still argue about his final hours. What he said, what he believed. Some insist he asked for a priest. Others say he spoke only of philosophy to the end. Perhaps both are true. The mind of a philosopher, after all, is large enough for contradictions. And then comes your second small laugh. Imagine Descartes arguing with the angel of death at the door. "Before I go," he'd say, "I must first be certain that I am going." The candle guttering beside him seems to tremble at that. He exhales, eyes half open, voice soft. "If thought is life," he murmurs, "then silence must be another kind of thought." The nurse crosses herself. He's very still now. The bed, this final bed, so unlike the first, holds him gently as he drifts away. The fire's warmth fades, replaced by something quieter, a stillness that feels almost deliberate. Outside, the snow keeps falling. It erases footsteps, softens rooftops, and covers the streets in perfect white geometry. Curves and lines that even he would have admired. Somewhere in the palace, a clock strikes the hour. It sounds muffled, like a breath in sleep. And with that, René Descartes, the man who once refused to rise, finally rests for good. But his mind, his method, his way of seeing, does not. It lingers, still moving between dream and logic, between doubt and certainty, whispering quietly through time. "I think, therefore I am." The world turns without him now. Years slip by, then decades, then centuries. But Descartes' ghost, more thought than spirit, stays awake. You can almost sense it, lingering in classrooms and coffee houses, hovering above chalkboards, resting in the pauses between questions that begin with, "But how can we know?" The man who doubted everything is long gone. But his doubt remains a kind of inheritance. The scene opens not in his cold Swedish room, but somewhere far warmer. Paris in spring, maybe. Or Amsterdam, when the canals mirror the sky. Statues stand where his bed once stood. Portraits hang where his breath once fogged the air. His name adorns books, equations, even city streets. The man who once feared he might not exist has become impossible to erase. You walk through the centuries with him quietly, as if leafing through the long afterlife of an idea. Each time someone draws a graph, each time a student whispers, "I think, therefore I am," before an exam. A faint echo stirs in that same rhythm of breath and logic. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Descartes' influence shaped not only philosophy, but science, mathematics, and psychology. His method of rational inquiry became the backbone of the scientific revolution. His coordinate system, the Cartesian plane, still underlies physics, engineering, and computer graphics. Even the term Cartesian has become shorthand for structure itself, for the belief that the world can be known through reason. But what of the man beneath the method? History remembers the mind, but rarely the body. The warmth of the bed, the creak of wood, the quiet laughter shared with Princess Elizabeth, the smell of ink and wax. Those details fade. but they're the soul of the story. You walk with him now through the museum of his legacy. The floors echo softly. In one corner, a marble bust captures his sharp features, the precise nose, the tired eyes. Tourists pass by, murmuring in dozens of languages. Some take photos, others just glance, and somewhere, you hear a child whisper to a parent, "He's the one who said that thinking thing, right?" The parent nods. The child looks puzzled. But doesn't everyone think? You smile to yourself. That's exactly the point. Now for your quirky tidbit. In 1663, 13 years after his death, Descartes' remains were exhumed from their resting place in Stockholm and transported to France. But the transfer was chaotic. Several parts of the skeleton reportedly went missing along the way. His skull being the most famous, it eventually turned up in a private collection, where someone had inscribed on it, René Descartes caput. Historians still debate whether it's genuine, but the irony is exquisite. Even in death, his body was divided, as if reenacting his theory of dualism one final time. You can almost hear him laughing about it, quietly, wryly. The mind and body, he'd say, never did travel well together. He has become more than man now, an idea with 1,000 faces. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment takes his clarity and builds upon it. In the 19th, Romantics rebel against it, craving passion instead of precision. In the 20th, scientists use his logic to split atoms and send men to the moon, while existentialists roll their eyes and declare, "Cogito? Nonsense. Existence precedes essence." Yet, even as they reject him, they're still talking to him. Historians still argue whether Descartes' legacy is a blessing or a trap. Did he liberate thought from superstition? Or did he lock us inside our own heads, forever doubting reality? The debates fill lecture halls, coffee shops, podcasts, even late-night YouTube streams. You can imagine him watching from somewhere above, bemused, whispering, "So you see, doubt lives on." The scene shifts again. Now you're in a modern classroom. Fluorescent lights buzz faintly. A teacher draws X and Y axes on the board, the chalk squeaking. Every student in the room is, without realizing it, invoking Descartes, his geometry, his order, his need to map the invisible. The teacher says, "Plot your point here." The students obey. You realize that's all he ever wanted, to give people a way to find themselves on the map. And here's your first small laugh of the section. If Descartes saw the chaos of the internet, he might try to fix it by inventing Cartesian Wi-Fi. Perfectly rational signal strength everywhere. No buffering, no doubt. You pass from the classroom into the world outside. Crowded streets, neon lights, skyscrapers like equations stretching toward the sky. Each one, in its way, an extension of his dream. Structure, clarity, the faith that logic can build stability out of confusion. Yet, in the midst of all this reason, the heart still beats unpredictably. The human spirit, emotional and wild, continues to resist being graphed. That's when you feel the callback. The hum from his bed centuries ago. That tug between the mathematical and the miraculous. The world may now be mapped, but people are still mysteries. Descartes understood that contradiction more deeply than anyone. He'd smile to see how we still live it. Data and doubt, precision and longing, science and story, all tangled together. He would recognize you, lying in your bed now, listening to his story. The faint glow of your screen, the hum of your fan, the warmth of your blanket, all of it familiar to him. You're his descendant in thought, restless, skeptical, searching for small certainties in the dark. Your second small laugh comes when you imagine his ghost visiting you tonight, peering at your bedside table cluttered with gadgets and saying, "You call me distracted?" He'd probably sit down beside you, cross his legs under the covers, and whisper. All these centuries later, you're still doing what I did, lying awake, asking whether anything is real. You'd smile and nod. He'd nod back, pleased. Outside, the night hums. Traffic, wind, the faint static of modern life. Inside, everything quiets. The philosopher's long journey seems to have come full circle. From a young soldier's bed in Germany to your own, here and now. He once doubted the body, but it's the body that keeps his ideas alive, breathing them, reading them, feeling them. His legacy isn't marble or ink. It's you, the listener, thinking and existing at once. Thought comforts him, and you. The centuries blur together, and you can almost hear his voice fade into a whisper. The method was never about certainty alone. It was about waking up. And maybe that's the legacy that lingers. Not the coordinates or the proofs, but the quiet human urge to open our eyes, stretch, and wonder what's real. And now the centuries finally rest. The echo of that first cold morning in 1619 hums quietly through everything, through history books, through equations, through bedtime stories like this one. The snow outside your own window might as well be the same snow that pressed against his shutters, the warmth of your blanket, the same comfort that held him while he doubted the world. Descartes is gone, yes, but his ghost of thought remains, patient, curious, and just a little amused that you're still here, lying in the dark. Listen. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe, feeling the rhythm of your own pulse. The same rhythm that once fascinated him, that bridge between body and mind. The story has folded back on itself. The philosopher who couldn't rise has risen endlessly in memory. And now you, the listener, are the latest to share his bed of thought. The air in the room is still. Descartes is centuries behind you now, but somehow still close. You can picture him exactly as before, half sitting up, papers scattered, candlelight flickering on a face caught between sleep and revelation. He is smiling slightly, not the self-satisfied smile of certainty, but the weary grin of someone who finally realizes that certainty was never the point. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Descartes' final resting place, after all its wanderings, lies in the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris. His tombstone bears only his name, dates, and a quiet Latin phrase, René Descartes, the reborn of the heart of thought. People still visit, leaving notes and flowers, and sometimes, strangely enough, pencils, as if by offering him writing tools, they're inviting him to keep thinking. Now for your quirky tidbit. His skull, that poor wanderer, ended up centuries later in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where it's displayed alongside the bones of ancient hominids, a philosopher among ancestors. A poetic mistake that feels exactly right. The mind that once mapped humanity's reason now rests among reminders of its origins. Historians still argue whether Descartes should be seen as the father of reason or the destroyer of simplicity. Some call him the architect of clarity. Others blame him for dividing mind and world too neatly. But those debates, really, are just ripples of his first gesture. The act of asking. He doubted so that we might dare to ask too. You lie back now, the story sinking softly around you. The hum of your fan becomes the crackle of his fire. The faint glow of your screen becomes candlelight. And like him, you drift toward that border between thought and dream. He would approve of this, you think? A listener half asleep, the mind meandering between the world and imagination. This was always his favorite territory. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear him speaking. not from some grand pulpit of philosophy, but from that same creaky bed, in the same quiet tone. Doubt, yes, but doubt gently. The world will reveal itself when you stop trying to force it. You can feel the warmth of that thought settle across your shoulders, like a blanket. Because that's the truth hidden in all the geometry and logic. Not that reason conquers everything, but that it soothes the noise. His method wasn't an armor. It was a lullaby for the anxious mind. He's smiling again now. That faintly mischievous look you can still see in old portraits. You don't have to solve the world, he whispers. You just have to think long enough to feel it. The story slows, the light dims, and you realize how circular everything has been. He started the day by refusing to get up. You end the night by refusing to stay awake. And before the wind down begins, here's your first small laugh of the section. Imagine Descartes alive in your era, running a late-night podcast called Bedtime Methodology. Each episode would begin with, I think, "Therefore we begin," and end with him falling asleep mid-sentence. The joke drifts away like smoke. The night settles deeper. The voice, the one that's been walking you through every flicker of thought, softens now. You're not in 17th century Germany anymore. You're here, breathing, warm, listening to the gentle hum of your own certainty. The small, indubitable fact that you exist, that your thoughts, however hazy, are yours alone. Maybe that's what Descartes really discovered. Not a cold logic, but the first true comfort of modern life. To think is to be here. And so, as the final embers of his story glow out, you close your eyes. You've walked beside him through frost and doubt, through geometry and ghosts, through letters and laughter and loss. The philosopher who couldn't get out of bed has become your companion in staying there. The candlelight fades. The pages of history close. And the story exhales one last time. The room grows quieter now. The light in your space, wherever you are, dims until there's only shadow and breath. The rhythm of the words slows. The edges of thought blur. And even Descartes' voice, bright and wry and endlessly curious, becomes a soft hum in the distance. You can feel your body relaxing. The muscles in your shoulders releasing one by one. The air feels thick, slower, kind, like the world is tucking you in. The mind that's been racing through centuries now begins to drift. You don't need to hold on to any of it. The frost, the ink, the candlelight, the sound of quills scratching over paper. Let it all dissolve, like snow melting under the faint warmth of morning. Descartes' story was never about genius alone. It was about stillness, about what happens when you let the world stop rushing for just long enough to notice yourself thinking. He called it the search for certainty. But maybe it was really the search for peace. And as your breathing evens out, you feel that peace arriving, soft, simple, undemanding. The blanket settles heavier on your chest. Your hands are still. The hum of the room turns rhythmic, like waves against the shore of sleep. Ah, you might dream of snow, or geometry, or the faint scratch of a quill in another century. Or you might dream of nothing at all. Just quiet. That's fine. Descartes would approve. You think, therefore you are. And now, perhaps, you sleep. Good night, traveler of thoughts. Good night, little philosopher. Good night, gentle mind.